How to Love Your Enemies, August 11, 2021. There can be many quotes that can be said about the title of this article. Keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. Do you not defeat your enemies by turning them into your friends? If you cannot defeat your enemies, join them, and much more of the same. I've made some enemies in my life before, and yes, I know I'm still young and all, but isn't that an obvious indication that I've had enough enemies in my whole short existence? Being young means being naive, being pretty much insensitive to what others might feel, or being ignorant or even indifferent to what others may have implied. Being young means taking everything at face value, and it's not changed until we develop many mistakes in our lives, much failures that teach us what's really right or wrong, what's inappropriate or not, what's acceptable or not. Do you remember the time when you were a kid and you were arguing with your childhood friend about what the rules of the games are? Or do you remember arguing with your mom after not dancing in front of your relatives? Do you remember the time when some fat kid in the playground bumped you over and never let you ride the slide again? Yeah, that big fat shit. Where is he now anyway? At that moment in time, you might have despised the person you are in argument with. You might have hated your mom for not bringing you to the park, or not buying you the dog you've always seen in the pet store. You might have hated your childhood friend, who, by the way, is your bestest friend now, because of not returning your favorite t-shirt. You might have hated that big fat kid whose snot was all over his face, and wonder how many ice creams had he eaten before having that encounter with you. As a child, you view them as your enemies. You hated them, you despised them, you tried to avoid them as much as possible, or you might have had to square off with them one time. The point here is that, as a child, we view ourselves as the protagonists, wearing our shining silver armor or our long silky pink princess dress if you're a girl, and feel as though the world owes us everything, that everything we want should be given, that we should be obeyed, and we should be let to ride the slide at least more than 5 times even though our pants are already covered in dirt. We feel superior as children, as though we were the boss of all, and this applies not only to our interaction with other people, but also with our interaction with things and animals. We feel godlike when we direct what happens to Mr. Soldier, or when we have tea time with our favorite doll. We feel entitled when our grandpa takes us for a ride in the car around town, or when we're inside our favorite fast food for mom to order our favorite spaghetti. And this kind of mental attitude is what creates this image of us in our heads as children. We are great, we can do everything, we have all the time in our lives, and we are special. Then, spoiler alert, puberty comes. These beliefs are then challenged as we face other human interactions, this time with more able consciousness. At this point, we develop self-awareness. This is why you feel as though you need to dress up going to a party, you need to wear makeup to school, you need to iron your clothes, you need to smell good around your crush, and all of that teenage stuff. We become more fragile as we grow in these years, and I don't mean fragile physically, but rather we become fragile more emotionally. It's actually interesting to note that as we grow old, we become more mentally secured with all our knowledge, with all our experiences, but we also become more emotionally vulnerable. Now you might be asking, what the hell does this have to do with loving my enemies? Well, shut the fuck up because I'm not done. Growing up, we tend to create our own self-identity. We try to understand what we like and what we dislike, who we like and who we dislike. We try to experience everything for us to test what we fear or what we excel at. And eventually, through these different experiences, we piece out together an image of ourselves. We gather our values and try to embody them the best we can. We try to acknowledge our strengths and use them to our advantage. We try to know our weaknesses and try to live with them. We adopt these different beliefs that we live for and by. Together with all of that, we create our image of who we are, what we are capable of and not, how we try to act on different situations that we are at. And we take pride of this self-image because we work so hard for it. But as strong as our self-image we think it might be, there will always be a time for it to be challenged. There will always be a crack in the door for disagreements to creep in, and that's conflicting when another person is that challenge. We grow up differently, therefore we develop different kinds of self-images that are precious to us. You might like to work with a group, but I like to be a sad loner because that's how I function better. You might like burgers, but I don't. You might want your pencil sharpened all the way, but I like it a bit blunt. You may believe in a different God than I do. You may have grown in a family whose values are of giving and selflessness, while I grew up in a family of self-love and independence. And all of these are valid. All these kinds of differences in self-images are valid. But conflicts arise when these different self-images clash with each other. Some clashes may be resolved quickly, and that's great. But as for those prolonged intolerance of differences, it's the point when enemies are created. To define it very quickly, enemies are basically people with who we disagree and can afford to come to terms. Enemies also have their self-images, as you have as well. And we humans tend to fight for our self-images because these self-images are what defines us. But how do we love enemies if we know we can't be in good terms of their self-images? Should I give up my beliefs in order to accord with his, or should he do that for me? The answer is that it's possible to compromise. The key to loving your enemy is to understand them. Understand what their beliefs are, what's important to them, and what's making them so defensive. Understand their point of view, where they're coming from, and what their motivations are for opposing you. Maybe he just doesn't want salad because he's allergic to cucumber. Maybe he doesn't want to close that business deal with you because it conflicts with his family schedule. Maybe that big bully in your class just needs some loving that he doesn't get from his home. Maybe your schoolmate that you hated the most because she always rolls her eyes for you is just envious of your looks and is genuinely trying to be like you, or even at least be friends with you. There are so many complexities in a person's opposition that it's best to consider them first rather than resent them right away. This lesson had saved me a lot of petty arguments and unnecessary anger in my relationships, whether it be in school or with family, with friends, or even with myself. The lesson is that problems are better resolved when it's not created. And for us to apply this to people is to understand compassion. We need to understand how other people feel and think. We need to understand what's important to other people, what their priorities are, and what goes against those beliefs. When an argument arises, the first thing we should front is compassion and not anger, for anger doesn't answer any question. Anger is just another log added to a bonfire. Anger does not resolve anything. It does not satisfy anything other than a person's ego and needs to release. What we need to have, and I've said this a couple of times already, is compassion. And that's the simple way to love your enemies. Simply think before you speak, understand before you oppose. People have these precious self-images, self-identities that we protect. You wouldn't want to be run over by other people, so why should you do it to them? They say, keep your friends close but your enemies closer. And that's agreeable because only in opposition that we truly learn what we lack. It's the only chance for us to be given a point of view that we may have never seen or considered before. Keeping your friends close isn't a bad thing, but it's a very stagnant value, for your beliefs are not challenged, but instead they're just encouraged and satisfied. It is in opposition that we are challenged, that we truly change, that we simply learn. They say, do you not defeat your enemies by turning them into your friends? And that's agreeable as well. The only way for you to defeat your enemy is not by destroying them, but rather by making them your friend. Does it feel good making another person feel bad? Does it feel good being right despite knowing that you have proven someone wrong? Why not make them your friend? Why not just agree to disagree? They say, if you cannot defeat your enemies, join them. And that's for us now. Is it okay for us to push that we're right even if we're not? The main question we should be asking ourselves is that, do we really want to be right? Do we want to win just because we want to be right? Are we able to sacrifice another person's self-identity just because we want the feeling of being right all along? This is our problem as humans. Most of us grow up as children, feeling superior to anyone else, feeling that we are always right but failing to understand other people. All of us go through puberty age, but some of us are always left at that stage. Some of us never graduate the puberty stage and stayed as teens, stayed as children. Only a few grow up as mature adults, and I feel that's the reason we always have unresolved problems and a long list of enemies. People we argue, people we hate, people we avoid, and people we don't like. While a child may be understandable to have created enemies, but as grown-ups, it's merely just another challenge for our self-images. It's better to remember that compassion should be our much better option than anger. It's better to understand than to argue, unless of course if the understanding process needs an argument. It's better to remember that your enemy is a human too, with fragile self-images, own beliefs and priorities, and is just in need of understanding and love. They're just an animal who ultimately wants care, attention, and understanding, just like you. And for you to suppress some of those needs is just you unleashing opposition for yourself. So remember, before you argue, before you create enemies, always try to understand. Develop some compassion and not anger, for it is in understanding that we achieve resolution. But again, that's me, and please feel free to disagree. Hey guys, if you like listening to this article, you can check out more articles like this one on my website. Just click the link in the description box below. And yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you for listening. Have a great day.